welcome to today's deep dive. We are so glad you're here with us. Today, we're taking you on a journey into a really vibrant and honestly kind of misunderstood era in global music history.
Yeah, we're looking at the massive genre-bending cross-pollination of the Nigerian music scene, specifically in the 1970s and 80s.
Exactly. And to do this, we've pulled from a pretty incredible stack of sources. We've got entries from the Discogs database, deep cuts from the Nigerian Music Digital Archive, and some amazing historical documentary footage from the series, Music in My Ears.
But you know, the actual spark for today's discussion is something else. It's a direct note from a listener.
Oh yeah, this note is great. It completely rewrites a very famous piece of rock history. Okay, let's unpack this because if you think about it, music history is basically a massive game of telephone.
Right, absolutely.
The official databases like Discogs, they get the broad strokes right. But, sometimes you need that local on-the-ground insight to find the gritty truth.
And to really get that truth, we need to set the scene for you. So think about Lagos in the early 1970s. Historians call this the post-war electrification era.
Which is such a cool name, by the way.
It really is. It spans roughly 1970 to 1974. The Nigerian Civil War had recently ended, and this whole new youth culture was emerging.
Right, and they were looking for a sound that matched the intensity of what they just lived through. I mean, the intensity of that moment.
Exactly. Before this, the dominant sound was high life, which, was beautiful, but it was very traditional acoustic and super heavy on the horns.
But this new generation, they wanted volume.
Yeah, they wanted amplification, so they start building this booming electric Afro-funk and Afro-beat movement.
We're talking heavy fuzz pedals, driving rhythms, just a really aggressive, loud sound.
Yeah.
And right in the middle of this creative explosion, international artists start flying in.
Which brings us directly to the myth of ARC Studio, or the Associated Recording Company.
Right. Inaugurated in early 1973, I believe.
Late January 1973, yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you look at the standard industry lore there's a 1974 Billboard article cited right on Discogs. It talks about ARC as this state-of-the-art 16-track facility.
Built by Ginger Baker, the drummer from Cream, and an engineer named Tony Orlando.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a regular studio. It was basically a spaceship for that region.
Oh, totally. They imported a Helios mixing console, a Studer tape machine. It was max budget tech.
And the official story, the one you see everywhere, is that Paul McCartney and Wings recorded their massive album, Band on the Run, right there at ARC.
But here is where that listener's note steps in and just shatters that narrative.
It's so good. The note pointed out that the bulk of the Band on the Run sessions actually happened at EMI Studios in Apapa, not ARC.
And that listener is spot on. In reality, only one single track from that entire album was recorded at Baker's high-tech studio.
Just one track.
Just one. The rest was all done at EMI APA.
Okay, I got to push back on this for a second. For you listening, you might be thinking the same thing. Why does it actually matter which studio they used? I mean, it's all Lagos in 1973, right?
Well, what's fascinating here is the stark contrast between those two spaces. ARC was polished, imported tech. You had 16 tracks to layer instruments perfectly.
Right.
But EMI Papa, that was a rudimentary 8-track facility. They were using heavily worn basic gear.
Oh, so they had to bounce tracks down, meaning if someone messed up, you couldn't just fix one guitar line.
Exactly. You'd have to re-record the whole blended track. McCartney literally had to rely on makeshift, rigged-up conditions.
Wait, I read he was dealing with crazy power outages, right? Like holding a broken microphone together with tape just to get a vocal take before the grid failed.
Yes, it was total survival mode. And that proves something really important. Brilliant art often comes out of limitation and grit, not just fancy gear.
And speaking of grit, there's another detail about those sessions. The percussion on the album wasn't just McCartney shaking a tambourine.
No, the rhythm tracks were laid down by Ginger Baker and an absolutely incredible Nigerian percussionist named Remy Kabaka.
That blows my mind. The rhythmic heartbeat of Band on the Run has literal Nigerian roots embedded in it.
It does, which naturally makes us look a little closer at Ginger Baker, because if McCartney only used his fancy studio for one song, what was Baker actually doing there?
Right, he didn't just drop in, build a studio, and isolate himself.
Not at all. He actively embedded himself into the local scene. He actually mentored a pioneering psychedelic Afro-funk band called BLO.
Oh, BLO. I was looking at the archives for them. Very experimental, super fuzz-driven guitar work.
They were the vanguard of that electrified sound, and Baker helped bring up their careers. In fact, he formed an Afrocentric band called the Salt Ensemble, and he brought Belo's core members into it.
Berkeley Jones, Lolu Akins, and Maiko Demosu, right?
Spot on. But it wasn't just them. Salt was this incredible gathering of legends.
Yeah, Joni Hostrup was in Salt too. And his story is wild. He was of literal royal descent, right? Like
Yeah.
his grandfather was a king.
The Owa of Ijeshaland, yes. But Hostrup left the royal life to become a musician. People called him Soul Brother Number One. He later formed the band Mono Mono.
Such a cool title. And the Lijadu sisters were also in the ensemble.
Taiwo and Kehinde. Identical twins and actually cousins of Fela Kuti.
Off small world.
Very. And Baker takes this whole crew, Salt, and they actually tour Europe. They even played at the 1972 Munich Olympics.
You know, if you've ever worked in a vibrant creative hub, you know exactly how this works. You get brilliant people in a room or on a tour bus and it becomes an incubator.
Exactly. That one collaborative project served as a launchpad for an entire generation of talent.
But that makes me wonder, if Salt is touring Europe and McCartney eventually goes back to the UK, what's happening back in Lagos? What did ARC and EMI sound like when the global rock stars weren't there?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at the thriving domestic scene, and you really can't talk about that without talking about Bongo's Ikwu.
Oh, yes. Nickname Forge, right?
Yeah.
From Benue State.
That's the one. He was famous for fusing highlife, folk, and soul, and he sang in his native Idoma language.
Which is just a totally different vibe from the heavy, fuzzy Afro-funk of BLO.
Completely different. He recorded massive, enduring hits like Still Searching and Cockcrow at Dawn, and he actually recorded them at both EMI and ARC.
So you've got these deeply traditional, acoustic-driven, soulful songs being recorded on the exact same mixing boards as the heavy psychedelic stuff.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows how creatively diverse the Lagos studio ecosystem really was. It was the cultural bedrock of the era.
By the way, Ikwe actually won an African Movie Academy Award in 2011 for the film Inale, which just shows how much staying power his art had.
Absolutely. But, you know, ecosystems inevitably shift, and by the late 70s and early 80s, the collaborative flow started to reverse.
Yeah, instead of artists flocking to Lagos, Nigerian artists started looking outward.
Specifically, they started looking to London.
Enter Eddy Grant. Now, if you're listening, you probably know him from The Equals, or as the Guyanese British guy who sang Electric Avenue.
But in this context, his role is so much bigger. He set up Coach House recording studios in London, which basically birthed the London era of Nigerian music.
Right, because the local Lego studios were getting overtaxed, and artists wanted that polished international post-production.
Exactly. Almost all post-production for major Nigerian 80s albums moved to Coach House. You had artists like J-Dobe, Pat Finn, and Sonny Okasun recording there.
Sonny Okasun is a huge name here. He recorded Fire in Soweto and Papa's Land with Eddy Grant, right?
And he did. Grant actively wrote and produced those tracks. And just as a historical fact, the lyrics of those anthems were direct statements addressing the anti-apartheid movement.
Right, and Grant's production really helped give that specific cultural message a global reach. But here's where it gets really interesting. Eddy Grant wasn't just like an outsider turning knobs.
No, he was deeply enmeshed in the culture.
He actually released a Yoruba version of his hit Say I Love You.
He did. And you know, Yoruba is a tonal language. So the pitch you use completely changes the meaning of the word.
Wait, so if you sing a melody that goes up when the word is supposed to go down?
You're speaking absolute gibberish or saying a completely different word.
That is wild.
It takes immense respect and study for a non-native speaker to pull that off. It wasn't a gimmick. It was true cultural blending.
Even his brother, Rudy Grant, released an album called Hello Africa, right onto the indigenous Nigerian Tabansi label.
Which just proves how fluid these international borders had become in the music scene.
So London was a huge hub. But to prove that this global dialogue was at its absolute peak, we have to talk about what happened in late 1979 back in Nigeria.
Yes, the ultimate musical summit. Roy Ayers meets Fela Kuti.
The American pioneer of jazz funk and acid jazz, sitting down with the undisputed father of Afrobeat.
They created the 1980 joint album Music of Many Colors.
And we're talking huge extended tracks here. 2000 Blacks Gotta Be Free and Africa Center of the World.
And that second track actually features Fela's young son, Femi, playing the alto sax.
Which is just an amazing passing of the torch caught on tape.
It really is. Now, this raises an important question. What actually happens when two completely different masters of rhythm collide like that?
because their styles are super different, right? Jazz funk is all about shifting, complex chords, and Afrobeat is this relentless static polyrhythm.
Exactly. But when they combined them, it wasn't just a musical experiment. It was a powerful statement of Pan-Africanism and cultural pride.
And a really successful one, too.
Oh, massively. This specific fusion literally became the DNA for modern Afrobeats.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear that influence everywhere. Artists like Erykah Badu and Kendrick Lamar have sampled this exact era of music.
It's the blueprint.
So what does this all mean? We started out just trying to correct a Discogs myth about a Paul McCartney recording session.
But pulling that one thread unraveled a massive web of influence.
Right. It's Ginger Baker and Remy Kabaka laying down percussion. It's the Salt Ensemble mentoring young talent. It's Eddy Grant's London hub and the epic summit of Roy Ayers and Fela Kuti.
And it reminds us that innovation just never happens in a vacuum.
True history is messy.
Mm.
It's highly collaborative. And honestly, it often relies on makeshift solutions like EMI, a papa, rather than perfect conditions.
But that leaves me with a final thought to ponder. We know Western artists took Nigerian rhythms back to Europe, and Nigerian artists brought Western production techniques back from London.
Yeah.
But what happens to the actual physical archives of these legendary makeshift sessions?
Oh, master tapes.
Think about it. If the official databases can get the studio location wrong for a massive rock album like Band on the Run,
Wow, yeah.
how many hidden, forgotten masterpieces by pioneering local artists like Mano Mano, BLO, or the Lijadu Sisters are still waiting to be correctly credited?
Or just sitting there waiting to be digitized and rediscovered in some dusty studio vault.
Exactly. The history's still out there.
Something to definitely mull over next time you put on a classic record. Keep digging, keep listening, and we'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.